Morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who are joining us in this webinar. We are very happy to host you to discuss a wonderful strategy that the Open Government Partnership will be launching very soon. In fact, we're launching it and releasing it to the world today. This is the first day of our now 6th annual global celebration of open government, the Open Gov Week. And around the world, there'll be lots and lots of activities happening to commemorate, to inspire, to advance the notions of open government around the world. So a year ago, just before Open Government Week in 2022, we launched the process to develop our new strategy for 2023 to 2028. And we're now delighted to be able to share the strategy that many of you, 1,000 or so people and institutions engaged with over the last 12 months to develop. And we want to excite you as we are excited about what the strategy is talking about, especially to move our collective focus to the implementation of what I think is a really ambitious strategy. My own observation of this is that there are 3 interesting pivots. We're going to have a more political strategy, a more political partnership. We're going to have a more people-centered partnership, which really builds and invests in the reformers who are doing exciting, courageous work to reform government. And we're going to have an inspiring partnership where stories are told and shared, and we help each other to really advance the strategy. With us, I'm excited to introduce to you co-chairs of the partnership. We start with Mr. Taimar Peterkop, who's the Secretary of State of Estonia. Welcome, Taimar. Thank you so much for your time. And Annabelle Cruz, who is the co-chair of the civil society. Thank you. On video, we shall be hearing from Minister Paolo Zangrillo, who is the Minister of Public Administration of Italy. He has a great message for us. And what's wonderful is that Italy were the ones who really pioneered Open Government Week, and now it has become a global norm for so many countries. And of course, we have Shreya Basu, who did a lot of the heavy lifting to bring together all those amazing ideas that we got into a coherent and exciting strategy. Thank you, Shreya. It's good to have you. Before we go ahead then, just to ask you, to invite you to send your questions and comments throughout the session in the chat, and we shall address them towards the end, or about 20 minutes or so of discussion. Interpretation is available in English and French and Spanish. So go to the button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, interpretation, and pick the language you would like to listen to us from. This will be recorded for YouTube and posted later today onto the YouTube channel for the OGP. So let's get going. And to commemorate the origins of Open Gov Week, we want to hear from the Minister of Public Administration of Italy, Paolo Zangrillo. And Italy, again, as I said, innovated Open Gov Week 6 years ago, and it is now an international call to action to make government more open and inclusive. Here is Minister Zangrillo.
Dear Taimar and dear friends from the Open Government Partnership community, I'm proud to kick off together with you the 6th Open Government Week, and I regret not to be with you during this virtual launch event. In the past 5 years, the Open Government Week has brought the energy and inspiration stemming from more than 1,300 events in over 70 countries. And Italy is proud to have been the first country worldwide to introduce this format, gathering reformers in and outside of the government to come together and discuss jointly common solutions to issues of common concerns. At the same time, let me say that this year's edition of the Open Government Week is quite unique. 2 months after the approval of the new OGP 5-year strategy as a result of a year-long consultation process that started in May 2022 and saw contributions throughout the process from over 1,000 individuals, groups, networks, and OGP multi-stakeholder fora, including from Italy. Today's topic, the future of open government, supporting democratic resilience and reform, is very much aligned with the mission we want to bestow to the OGP, that is to inspire, connect, and enable an ever-growing community of reformers and champions from government and civil society to take action together. Thanks to our common efforts, open government is back on the top of the global agenda. The second summit for democracy in March underscored the need for an inclusive political participation and leadership around the world. The OECD is delivering on the commitments we made last November by the means of the Luxembourg Ministerial Declaration on enhancing representation, participation, and openness in public life. First of all, by framing new metrics and innovative approaches on citizens' participation and on how the government informs, responds to, interacts with, and represents such demand of civic participation. As regards Italy, as national government, we will organize 5 events during the Open Government Week. The first event will be on participation, with the launch today of a national hub for participation in cooperating with civil society organizations. We will also organize policy dialogues between government and civil society on digital inclusive transformation, integrity, on gender and generational balances. Finally, we plan to give voice to our multi-stakeholder forum to advance new ideas for the definition of future national and local priorities. We are proud to do so as stepping stones towards the next OGP summit in Tallinn, as which we will be happy to participate and to provide a contribution to its success. Let me conclude by saying that open government, institutional resilience, and stronger democracy are closely interlinked. The main challenge as the OGP is entering in its second decade is to seize the opportunity to create a partnership that is truly open and global. Open to all true reformers and innovators coming from within and outside the government and the civil space, and global so that it can help us in countering truly global issues such as digital transformation and climate change, and keeping governments to deliver better for their people. So, I wish a great start for the Open Government Week to us all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Minister Zangrillo. I think he sets the scene very, very nicely for us for this conversation, but beyond on the implementation of an exciting strategy. I'd like to note that if you look, the Italian Multi-Stakeholder Forum is already discussing how to embed the vision and the mission of the new strategy in how they move forward. It's really great to see their tweets just before we went on air right now. So let me invite Shreya. Shreya will give us a bit of a highlight of the OGP strategy in a summary form as well. Shreya, welcome.
Thanks so much, Aidan. Hello, everyone. We're really pleased to be kicking off OpenGov Week 2023 with the presentation of OGP's 5-year strategy. And I, of course, want to convey my huge thanks. Aidan mentioned that there were more than 1,000 contributions across the year-long process. So we want to convey a huge thanks to begin to everyone who has contributed in bringing us to this point. As Aidan and Minister Zangrillo before me have mentioned, developing the strategy has been a year-long effort which kicked off just before last year's OpenGov Week. And it has been a strategy that is co-created with our community under, of course, the leadership of the steering committee. What we've also tried to do is put into practice our own co-creation and participation standards throughout this process. And I must say we all have had renewed respect for all of you who have been leading these processes in your own countries and partnering with others in bringing these standards to life. Lots of lessons learned through that process, which we'll save for another day. So this year-long effort has resulted in a renewed vision and mission statement, which very much focuses on growing and better connecting the reformers, the champions from government, from civil society and beyond, who can make change happen, drive open government reforms with the ultimate aim of strengthening our democracies and delivering better societal outcomes. So that emphasis on outcome-oriented open government is coming through strongly in our renewed vision and mission statements. What we heard, as Aidan mentioned, what are the shifts with the strategy? What we heard from the community is that for OGP to be relevant, vibrant, and impactful in its current moment, we need to collectively push the frontiers together. And this means a more political, a more politically engaged partnership, where a much broader spectrum of heads of state, but more importantly, perhaps ministers, mayors, members of parliament, current and prospective leaders that can provide political support for open government and OGP are engaged. It means proactively and quickly allying with leaders with the authorizing environment where windows of political opportunities emerge, and working with civil society and champions when the opposite occurs. It's also about partnering much more effectively with our global and regional partner organizations, other networks and initiatives to build the stronger political coalition for open government, where the principles of open government are being reinforced, not just by OGP, but all the key relevant fora of our times. The second, a more people-centered partnership. And this means collectively investing in the very people that make up this OGP community. Bringing in also new voices from community, coalitions, the leaders that make change happen, and equipping them with the tools, the resources, the capabilities that they need to secure public and political support, engage new actors, and help spread open government principles and practices. It also means finding ways to build greater public support for open government and deepening our efforts as we move forward to engage the public in the policies and decisions that impact their lives. And finally, as Aidan mentioned, we're aspiring to be a much more inspiring partnership where we expand our work in providing the data, the evidence, the stories, but perhaps as importantly, the connections that make open government come alive with real stories of difference and impact, with the aim of making OGP the home where people go to for inspiration and connections. So how are we going to do this? The plan is to accomplish this through pursuing 5 strategic goals for the next 5 years. The first is to build a growing and interconnected community of open government reformers and leaders, and really supporting them in developing the capabilities, competencies, and connections that they need to create support for and sustain open government reforms. New approaches that we'll be testing here include partnerships with schools of government and other learning partners so that we can have the knowledge and skills spread beyond those who are involved in OGP processes, as well as expanding some of OGP's still nascent leadership development programs. Second, it's retaining our emphasis on action, which OGP has always been commended for the action orientation of the platform. But going forward, this means going beyond the OGP action plans with the ambition of also mainstreaming open government in all levels and branches of government. So one of our strengths, as I was saying, has been this focus on co-creation, action, implementation of meaningful reforms. The goal now is to take this approach to all levels and branches of government, as we are already seeing take place in some of our OGP members, and the aspiration is to make this much more widespread. Part of this is also going to be creating a much more flexible action framework that will allow members to work on things like longer-term open government strategies or embedding open government approaches in key national and local priority programs and policies, including sectoral policies and programs. This new action framework will be developed in 2023, but will be rolled out from next year onwards. Part of this effort would also mean doubling down on something that was started as a small pilot back in 2016, but has grown since. And that would be investing much more in OGP Local, both by sustainably expanding the current OGP Local program, which has about 100 plus participating members today, but also placing a much bigger emphasis on partnerships with local and regional associations that can work with governments, local governments, to support them in adopting OGP-like co-creation processes and adopting and scaling open government innovations. And here again, we have experiences in member countries like Morocco, Mexico, and few others to build on. The third goal is to really accelerate collective progress and show collective results on a few key open government topics. So OGP, in line with its design principle of letting domestic actors choose the most important priorities for themselves, we will be retaining this design principle, but we will also simultaneously be launching a partnership-wide challenge at the 2023 OGP Global Summit in Tallinn to challenge all members to adopt and implement ambitious reforms in some key open government areas. Now, an initial set of priorities that have surfaced through the strategy consultations include open government approaches to tackle corruption, to develop and use digital technologies, advancing action on climate change, advancing legal empowerment and access to justice, and of course, maintaining a cross-cutting focus on participation and inclusion across everything that we do. The challenge will include other topics and is currently being defined and is something that we hope to launch at the Talent Summit. Fourth, and in recognition of the significance of this for the very, for the very survival, for the very essence of the partnership, a goal is to protect an expand civic space as a strategic goal with an emphasis on action rather than rhetoric. And here much of our work will include cultivating champions who can make progress in their own context, as well as inspire others to follow suit. So we can start some reversing of the trends that we have seen in recent times, which have been much more troubling. This will also include, of course, reviewing and updating OGP's policies on civic space from time to time, which include mechanisms like the values check, the response policy, and the rapid response protocol. And finally, it will mean investing in sourcing and sharing high quality data, evidence stories, and innovations, both making them easier to access and in a diverse range of formats and products tailored to the needs of our very diverse community. But more importantly, it means also investing in strengthening the connections between the people behind those stories, putting them back at the heart of the partnership and enabling them to inspire one another. So this is ambitious, as Aidan mentioned, which means implementing the strategy is obviously going to be a big collective effort on all our parts. This is not just a strategy for the steering committee or the support unit. This is a strategy that has roles envisaged for everyone, and we talk more about this in the strategy document that you can read on the website, and links to which will be posted shortly in the chat box. 2023, of course, will be a year of transition as we flesh out the details of new programs and ways of working. It will continue to see engagement of key stakeholders throughout these processes, and annual support unit and IRM work plans will continue to be overseen and approved by the steering committee to pivot us into some of these new ways of working of the strategy. Of course, this also means that OGP global summits, regional events, our stakeholder surveys, all our touch points of contact with the community from this point on will be used to advance implementation, take regular stock of progress, and solicit input on how we can continuously move towards implementing this strategy and turning it into reality. All of this will, of course, also require new results and learning framework, which will also be part of what we'll be focusing on in the transition year this year. So to conclude, what can everyone who's listening in do? As the call to action from our co-chairs, which you can also read on our website today, highlights, there are a few things that we are asking from all of you. One, we ask you to convene your national and local OGP multi-stakeholder fora or domestic stakeholders, or the partner networks that you work with to discuss the opportunities presented by the strategy and see how you can implement it in your own domestic context. Two, we are asking that you model ambition and action in the partnership-wide policy goals that will soon be announced and inspire others to do the same. And finally, and I'm sure Secretary of State Peter Kopp will talk more about this, we invite everyone to attend the 2023 OGP Global Summit in Tallinn, which will be a key moment for continued community dialogue towards implementation. There'll be opportunities to take the strategy forward and opportunities for members of the community to volunteer to lead on different areas. So with that, I'll stop there. But of course, the support unit remains available to answer any questions from the community now and throughout the year to come. Thanks, Aidan. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Shreya. You went through a lot of information in a very short period of time to show the wealth, the value, the ambition of the new strategy and its 5 goals, and the invitation for us to actually do something, not just sit back and read it and put it on the shelf. To do something about it is a very important invitation. Before I go to our co-chairs, let me just acknowledge the presence of so many of you, diverse from across the world. We've got people from Papua New Guinea, a student from South Korea, an MP from Uganda listening in, and many, many other participants from Brazil and Ecuador and Morocco, Italy, Germany. Welcome. So our co-chairs, you got the whole world listening to you. So let's have a conversation now about the strategy. And let me start, reintroduce Mr. Taimar Peterkop, who is the Secretary of State of Estonia and co-chair this year, alongside Annabelle Cruz, civil society co-chair. And I'll start with you, Taimar. Thank you for being with us. Let me ask you this. The context for democracy globally is extremely complicated. from the invasion of Ukraine by Russia to the rise of authoritarian states and decline of democratic space. How do you see the role of open government in tackling this?
Thank you for this. I think this goes to the core of these difficult times that we are living in, or interesting times that we are living in, and the very complex environment it has created, and how we can deal with it. I think what we have learned from the past years, from the pandemic, or now with the Ukraine crisis, how it is affecting our region or entire world, or other crises as well that we have experienced in past years, is that while we are living in these interesting times and the world is getting more complex and the challenges are growing, what we've recognized is that the governments really cannot do it alone, although the expectation is that the government would do something about it, but the governments cannot do it alone. And I'm sure that other governments beside Estonia have learned the similar lessons, that it's together with the civil society, with academia, with private sector, that we need to face these challenges together in order to be successful. And the word that we are using to describe this strong relationship is resilience. The resilience of our societies. It means that the relationship between civil society and government is strong enough that we can face those challenges. And you cannot wait for the crisis to appear in order to start cooperating with the civil society. You need to build this relationship before. So when the crisis emerge, then we can do it alone. So the open government plays a very important role to build this resilience of our societies.
Thank you. That's it's a great invitation from governments. It's an uncommon one, I must say, Taimar, that governments are inviting proactively civil society to try and address some of these issues. So, Annabelle, I want to ask you this question. Can civil society working on open government and democracy is some of the most resilient, to use Taimar's word, innovative and brave in the world? So how can they be better supported in their work? And what should be done to ensure civic space is protected?
Thank you, Aidan. Thank you to the big OGP community that are here from all regions of the world. I'm really delighted to be here with all of you and sharing the stage with the two inspiring countries as Italy and Estonia, and I'm looking really forward to continuing cooperating with the government of Estonia and my friend Taimar on our road to Tallinn and the OGP summit in September. And to your question, Aidan, you are right. Civil society organizations around the world are strong pillars in defending and in realizing democracy. Without strong civil society, there is no open government. There is no OGP. And for fulfilling this role and for civil society voice to be heard, civil society organization must be robust, must be open, must be accountable, and have to be able to work in open civic space. Civic space is the bedrock of any democratic society. And when civic space is open, citizens and organizations are able to participate and to communicate without hindrance. We, civil society organizations, will be able to claim our rights and also influence the political and social structures around us. But this can only happen when the state holds by its duties to protect citizens and respects and facilitates their fundamental rights. An open and pluralistic civic space must guarantee freedom of expression and opinion, freedom of assembly, and freedom of association. Unfortunately, as Shreya has already mentioned, and you too, there are problems around the world. Only 3% of the world's population lives today in countries with open civic space, according to the Civicus Monitor. And civil society organizations face many challenges to operate, and that include repressive frameworks, regulatory frameworks, systematic political discrediting of our work, negative narrative building, vilification of our work, and also physical and digital risk. So how can civic space be protected? Just 4 examples of a strategy that also implies support to civil society. Monitoring of civic space, not as an academic exercise, but a monitoring that will allow to make this situation visible and known, to produce alerts and to more proactively highlight progress or regression on civic space, for instance, among members of GP. Mobilizing more leadership, more political leadership for civic space at all levels, and connecting civic space to discussion of other priorities. Civil society solidarity networks and civil society accountabilities. We organizations need to generate resilient strategies based on communication with our stakeholders and solidarity networks. And of course, in this context, civil society accountability is not an end in itself, but a way to strengthen our organizations, to protect our organizations in a shrinking civic space and to generate legitimacy. And last, the implementation of existing international instruments, just like the OECD DAC recommendation for enabling civil society in international cooperation, a very strong, good instrument that conveys a shared belief about the importance of a strong civil society. And one of its pillars is promotion and strengthening of civic space. This is for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Annabelle. That's a lot. And what I like about it is that it connects a little bit with the time I was saying, to build this resilience, you need to build relationships, and to do so before crisis strikes. I want to come back to you, Taimar, with this question. You'll be hosting, as Estonia, the next OGP Global Summit in Tallinn in September. What are your goals and expectations from that summit? And how can the partnership, how can all of us listening in and our networks really help you to achieve those goals?
Well, I talked about the resilience of our societies already. This is certainly one of the goals, considering where Europe is right now. But all in all, I think we already heard that in previous presentation that the focus of the summit should be on the strategy, that the summit should be an enabler for us to effectively implement the strategy. So I'm really looking forward to have a great participation, great discussions, great ideas, how to put that what is in strategy to practice, how we can implement that. So this is, I think, the main goal. And of course, we'll do it the best way we can to help to bring it out, so that the discussions would be very interesting, inspiring, but also that we can have fun. It's the when we do it, the summit will take place in creative part of our capital, this small part of the city, where our most creative organizations, businesses, etc., have been gathering. As you know, the summit will take place in the 6th and 7th of September. The registration is open till the 28th of May. So please do that. And the draft agenda is also open for comments till the 19th of May. So when you see something you like there, emphasize that. And then if you see something that is missing, please emphasize that as well. So let's make it an event that really kicks off the implementation of the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Taimar. I want to continue your plug and say, you know, in the creative part of the city, I'm told we're going to be surrounded by musicians and producers and artists, and really it's sounded like a very exciting time, but also you're asking us to join in by creating and co-creating the agenda. And there are 25 sessions on that link that you have just mentioned for us to comment. So if somebody could put that link up on the chat for everybody to go, it'll be fantastic. Let's make this summit ours and about implementing this ambitious strategy. Annabelle, how do you think governments and civil society can work most effectively together to solve some of the complex societal problems that are facing the world, and we hinted at the very beginning? How can we work together?
Yeah, thank you again, Aidan. And your question is not random. I mean, like, it's the theory of change of OGP, the DNA of OGP. Civil society engagement is a core component of the OGP model. And OGP members have been created action plans and engaging in regular dialogue with civil society through different platforms like the multi-stakeholder forums on open government in all OGP members in many countries. I want to remind that the publication OGP Vital Signs that brought the evaluation of the first decade of OGP found evidence about the strength of civil society engagement and how it predicted more positive outcomes. So in its first decade, civil society has become more involved in OGP, no question about that. More involved, more engaged. The seat that civil society has in OGP has been filled more substance and content. But several gaps still remain. I think cooperation between civil society and government will be much more effective if we take into account some principles or if some actions are held. Needless to say that an open civic society, an open civic space, and going back to the previous questions that you made, open civic space is a condition that supports cooperation between governments and civil society, and that cooperation will make civic space even more enabling. Another factor, trust building and mutual accountability. In this sense, there are examples that show that civil society organizations are taking important steps to promote trust and to strengthen partnerships with other stakeholders. Governments too. There are many or several trust building initiatives led by civil society that demonstrate that we are trying to walk the talk. And one recent example is the consolidation or official foundation of the global standard for civil society accountability, adopted by civil society networks around the world, a voluntary self-regulating platform based on commitment, on aspirational commitment that embrace the concept of dynamic accountability. And finally, co-creation of plans is fine, is important, but also implementation. There is room for improvement in terms of advancing open government plans, engaging civil society, not only in the design, but also in the implementation and the evaluation of plans. And I left it for the last point, but it's one of the most important, the cooperation of civil society with local governments. At the local level, we often find the best examples of innovation and good practices in terms of cooperation between civil society and government. So let's learn from those practices and let's support them. Thank you.
I couldn't agree with you more, Annabelle. Traweza, we try to do work at the local government level, and I got to tell you, it's more tactically strategic, and you can see the results tangibly very, very quickly. So I want to give you 39 seconds, Annabelle, to pick one thing from the strategy which really excites you. One thing. You got, okay, 40 seconds.
One thing.
One thing.
Well, that's a very difficult question because I am really very excited with the new OGP strategy as a whole. I think the new strategy, it is the product of lessons learned. It's a product of an extensive consultation. It's people-centered, it's more political. It wants to go beyond the usual suspect. And I think it really challenges ourselves. But if you ask me for one line or one element, I want to take the second strategic goal, and its implication: accelerate collective progress on open government reform. And one of the priorities under that goal is to raise the bar on transparency, accountability, participation, and inclusion. And this is the element I want to pick up: raise the bar, be more ambitious in terms of transparency, accountability, participation, and inclusion. And we at OGP, we have done progress on transparency and open data efforts, but we need to go beyond transparency and accountability for the sake of transparency and accountability. The whole OGP community, we need to raise the bar on how we integrate open governance approaches into our work. And this is valid for central governments, for local government, for the judiciary, for parliament, and for civil society organizations. We all have to be more accountable, more inclusive, and governments and civil society working together will need to make a collective push on amalgamating inclusive participation into our institutions.
Thank you.
Governments and civil society institutions.
You were very excited about the entire strategy. It's fantastic.
I am. I think it's really a challenge and an effort that will produce excellent outcomes.
Somebody in the chat is agreeing with you profusely. Lots of applause. Taimar, for you too, what one thing really excites you about the strategy that you helped so wonderfully shepherd to its conclusion?
Well, it's difficult to bring at one thing. It's I was thinking about it now that you asked it. When I used to run the government digitalization agency, then I learned that how the entire Digital Estonia is built on cooperation between the government and our IT community. In these different times of crisis that I've experienced now as the head of government office, I've seen the other aspects of civil society and governments cooperating together. I think the most exciting thing for me is the nature of the relationship between the governments and civil society in different areas, in different situations, and in different countries. That the Estonia, a very small country, we have very different experiences and stories to tell. But to learn from other countries and to share that experience, I'm sure that we can find new ways how the government and civil society can interact. So this aspect is the most exciting for me as a civil servant.
It's fantastic. All that interaction and cooperation, what you said at the very beginning, creating a resilient society, not just institutions, but a resilient society has thick networks of collaboration, trust, co-implementation, in order to make it really be able to withstand crises or anticipate them beforehand. So thank you so much, both of you, for your opening comments. We're inviting questions. I know our host has been asking people to make some comments and questions from the audience and the listeners. There's one I want to just highlight, and maybe you can comment, Tamar or Annabelle. And this is from Alex Howard in the US, who says, unless publics know about OGP and believe commitment leads to positive impact on our lives, there won't be domestic support for it. He estimates that less than 1% of US citizens have ever heard of OGP, much less participated, because of one administration and this particular administration are not necessarily engaging and informing Americans about OGP. But you know, Alex, 1% of the American population is about 3 million people. That's a lot of people. That's very many Estonians, you know. So I don't know, you know, Annabelle, Tamar, what do you think about the public, the general public knowing about it as a driver, or is it a support for opening up government and persuading governments to be more open?
Well, 3 million people is also a huge number in Uruguay, where I come from. It's all the population. We are 3 million people. But I think the strategy in some way recognizes the need to go beyond, especially the two first strategic goals in terms of people-centered and making the norm of open government, making the norm of all different levels of government, of society. That will make OGP and open government more known. And also it will relate to the needs and to the daily life of people. Because OGP, the final goal of our organizations is to improve the life of the people. So of course, I mean, the support has to come not only from certain elites and sectors, but from a broader movement of reformers, of activists, and from organizations. So I think the strategy is trying to face that gap. Thank you.
Yes, same thing for you, Tamar. Tamar, you know, Estonia strikes me as an open country. At least you're making real attempts to be inclusive and transparent to Estonians without necessarily branding it with the OGP brand. So can I ask you, do you need to brand it with OGP, or does the concept, the principles of openness, transparency, inclusion can drive and have their own internal energy that we can build on?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. The goal should be that the ideas are familiar and that the population know about the principles of open government, and then they will without our politicians, they demand from our politicians that they would act according to those principles. That's the main goal, and we should focus on that. But if the organization can help, if the brand of the organization can help us in doing that, then we can certainly use that. But the main focus should be on the principles itself.
Yeah, so on that point, there's a question from Pablo Ibarra from Chile. He asks in Spanish, but thankfully they've translated it for me very nicely. Annabelle, for you, and how can we install OGP in civil society organizations in such a way that it comes from the bottom up? $64 million question.
Thank you. Thank you, Aidan. May I respond in Spanish? There is translation since Pedro Ibarra is from Chile and I am from Uruguay.
We will move to the translation.
Please do that. No, porque me parece una pregunta muy importante, Pablo, de la instalación del gobierno abierto y de los principios de gobierno abierto en la sociedad civil. Por un lado, la participación de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil en los distintos foros multiactor, en los distintos foros nacionales, con los gobiernos locales. En el caso de Chile, Chile es un país miembro de OGP y además varias jurisdicciones locales también lo son. Uno es esa forma institucional. Lo otro son los principios de gobierno abierto dentro de las organizaciones. Transparencia, rendición de cuentas, participación, inclusión, que abracemos como organizaciones esos principios, que nos autoevaluemos permanentemente si estamos nosotros como organizaciones también llevando adelante los principios de gobierno abierto. Esas son las dos formas, no vienen de abajo ni de arriba, vienen de adentro de nosotros mismos, de las organizaciones. Gracias, Chile. Thank you, Aidan, and thank you for allowing me to speak in Spanish.
Thank you very much, Annabelle, for answering. Tamar, there's a question here, and I'd like for you to talk a little bit about Parliament. There's a question here. What is the role of parliaments in the OGP, according to the new strategy? But I want to open it up for you to talk a little bit about rahvalgatus. I think that's how you say it. It's a complicated Estonian word, talking about how citizens can engage in the process of passing laws. But connect those to the role of parliament and how citizens can engage almost directly in passing laws. Give us an Estonian inspiration.
The role of parliament is to talk to the people, and the politicians in the parliament should be the bearers of those values of open government when they are adopting legal acts and during the proceedings in the parliament. It is one of the most important roles there to engage the civil society, that they can have their opinions presented in the proceedings in the parliament. Rahvaalgatus, it's a web platform in Estonia that allows citizens to come up with the ideas that either on policy side or creating new legal acts, that what the government and the parliament should do. Then it's how we are using digital devices in order to engage more the citizens, to make the citizens to give them an ability to contribute, to start draft legal acts or policy decisions. So that is a platform, a digital platform for them to engage.
There's another question, I think, that sort of builds on what you're saying, and then I'll come to some from, gosh, there's so many questions coming in, but I'm looking for, here he is, Duncan Hames, to either one of you. Do some member governments especially, need encouragement to respond enthusiastically to the leadership Estonia is giving at the summit? How best can we support the invitation from Estonia to them to make the most of this opportunity in the summit? Is that a question you think you can address? You know, how can we support the government of Estonia to get governments to attend the summit and be part of that fantastic conversation about the implementation? What can civil society do? What can the media do?
Make noise.
Make noise. There you go. You heard, make noise on your social media feeds. Annabelle, I want to ask you a question that came from, oh gosh, again, I'm not very good at multitasking. From Jordan, what is the role of media, all forms of media, in the new strategy?
Well, that's a very ample question, and I see the role in different layers of level. On the one hand, media has to be a stakeholder, a partner in terms of communicating with people and in communicating with citizens about open government progress, failures, and projects and activities. So it's a responsibility from OGP leaders, OGP staff, OGP activists to communicate and to transmit through media, be it traditional media or social media. That's one point. The other is to combat disinformation and to combat fake news. I think that in that part that makes and relates to also transparency and accountability, and also the discreditation of some actors, media has an important role. So this is a call to the responsibility of media and the provision of reliable news. I can see that two aspects.
Great. There's some such good questions coming in. Sorry, I keep you in the hot seat for 5 more minutes. Tamar, here's a question from Ukraine. Don't you think that individual initiatives such as OGP, Open Parliament, etc., should we not switch them to a single initiative, for example, the Open State? That's the ambition I think Annabelle was speaking about earlier. After all, openness should be demonstrated not by individual structures or branches of power, but by the state as a whole. This is from Oleksiy from Ukraine. Tamar, what do you think about that ambition?
Well, I need to understand first what the open state means exactly, but intuitively, yes, we should aim to that. But I think open state is not the only thing we need. We need active citizens to participate, and I think we should hear the story of Ukraine. I think Ukraine historically has had a very active citizenship and a quite weak state. So starting from the Cossacks, I think Ukraine has had active citizenship for centuries. They have held the culture of Ukraine under these very difficult times that through history Ukraine has evolved. So open state is not enough. You need active citizenship, active citizens, that they are organizing, finding ways how to contribute. So there are other aspects as well, but open state is a important part of that.
Fantastic. Let me bring in Shreya. Shreya, I'm going to ask you a really tough question.
Thanks, Aidan.
And it's simply this: how will OGP respond more effectively to democratic backsliding? Tell us about the procedure issues and the values issues. How will we respond to democratic backsliding?
You really meant it when you said you were saving the top one
Yes,
for.
I did.
I mean, obviously, OGP has certain formal instruments in place at this time, like the response policy. We do have a bar at the time of entry that needs to be met through the values check. And we have something that's meant to be a little bit more agile in response in the form of the rapid response protocol. Now, part of the strategy also envisages that over the course of this period, we will review periodically and make updates to these to make sure that they are working as intended. In terms of but these instruments go only so far in a global context where you're seeing democratic backsliding happening in countries that were once stalwarts of democracy, stalling also processes of democratization in other parts of the world as they look and see the trends in places that were once held in high regard. And that, I don't think, is a fight that can be won through policies and instruments and and sanctions and penalties. What I find interesting about the new strategy, therefore, is that the emphasis it places on reformers in government, in civil society, across all branches of the government, finding the champions where they are in pushing back on these trends. That's where I think OGP can respond more effectively. I do not believe that in a voluntary partnership. There are, of course, places where we can strengthen our strengthen our sticks, strengthen our carrots. But beyond that, I think it will have to be putting power in the hands of the domestic reformers at a time when there's also a lot of concern about external intervention in domestic politics and domestic processes. So I think it is going to be in the reformers and investing in their capacities, their capabilities to drive this work, to connect them to their peers, because this can be a very lonely battle, as many of you on this call can attest to from your experiences, and make sure that the platform is serving as that collective place for lessons to be learned. So it's not just the authoritarians who have a playbook that's shared, it's also the Democrats who have, and I don't mean that in the political sense of that word, who have a shared agenda, so to speak. So of course, there's room for reviewing our policies and mechanisms, and we will do that in the strategy period, but it is about coming together and strengthening our collective core by providing support and strength to each other, where perhaps we can be more effective. And finally, we do also envisage, as part of the new strategy and its emphasis on civic space, that going forward, we will call out more visibly where we see those egregious violations take place, where we see backsliding and regression. That is something that we will be putting much more visible prominence to than we have perhaps in the past. So to the extent that that works in convincing people to change their minds, and to the extent that those have those effects that we desire, one can try and see if we do things differently on that front, if it produces other results. But I think the most powerful tool that we have in OGP is the individual reformer, and what that adds up to when you come together and create that basis, the foundations for pushback.
Maybe ask you this final question for Ishrea. This is a 5-year strategy. It's looking ahead. What are some of the themes you think that are contained in it or might emerge from it that speak to the younger generation, to connect this intergenerational conversation so that the spirit of openness really lives on in some concrete ways in the next generation of participants in this?
I think there's a lot in there that's starting to emerge that could be potentially exciting to attract young people into the partnership, but also for the partnership in turn to become more relevant. Some of our participants have been mentioning the impacts of polarization, misinformation, complete subversion of truth in many of our societies, and the fact that we are going to be focusing on not just the use and promotion of digital technologies, but also the governance of them, I think will be an important drawing card, if you will, for young people. So also climate. I think it's we've seen young people lead the climate change battle, if you will, outside of the open government and within the open government circles as well. And I think that's going to be another important question, because it touches upon the future of the planet that not only they will inherit, that they're already living in. I'm in 45 degrees India right now, and this is certainly not the temperatures we had when I was growing up here. So, the visceral impacts of some of these issues that young people we know care about, it's interesting that I think it's exciting for us that we'll be able to focus on it. And then finally, I think it's this cross-cutting focus on inclusive participation. I think that's where the challenge to the membership will have to be to go beyond the box-ticking one-off consultative exercises we see in the name of public participation, but actually listen. Listening governments was one thing we used to describe open governments as back in the day when I joined OGP. We're going back to that and making sure that their voices are heard through these processes as we move forward. So I think there's a lot in there. But obviously the collective onus is on us to make sure we're not just speaking in our bubbles and the usual suspects, but making a concerted effort to go out and attract young people. And just this morning, we were at the Korean Open Governments Forum, which was exclusively for young Korean students. And I know some of them have joined the webinar today. So it's a small step in that direction, but one I hope we'll be able to build on in the coming years.
Shreya, it's not a small step. I remember at the summit, the South Korea summit, there was a whole session that I was able to participate in with young people from around the world, put together by the Accountability Lab, to talk about how they can be better, more excitedly engaged in open government. And it's fantastic that there is room for them to really sink into this strategy on issue of digital governance, climate change, participation and inclusion, and really take it forward. So that's fantastic. Wow, what a great conversation. And it is just the beginning. Let me tell you a couple of things I've picked out from it. Number one, ambition. This really looks, feels, tastes like an ambitious strategy in the sense that it's more political, it is more people-centered, so steps out of just the partnership itself and to others, it is more inspiring. I think the second thing about it is that really we want to focus on implementation, on making a difference. We spent 10 years building the machine and building the case for open government. I think now we have to demonstrate it in real concrete ways. And the third one, for me personally, is the strategic goal number 3 about protecting and expanding civic space, really to generate that kind of societal resilience that Taimar spoke about. And Annabelle invites us as civil society not to point fingers at governments to be more open, but for us ourselves as civil society to build networks, but also to be more transparent in the work that we do. So there is a lot there for everybody in the strategy. There is a lot of opportunity in participating at the Tallinn OGP Summit in September. And I would like to thank all of you for participating from all around the world, really from Jordan to Papua New Guinea to Venezuela and Brazil and all points in between. And to give a special thanks to our co-chairs, Annabelle and Taimar and Shreya for shepherding this fantastic strategy together. So I invite you all to go onto your website, go onto the social media, read the strategy, download it. It's got some beautiful summary pages, share it with others, and we look forward to continuing this conversation locally, nationally, and internationally in the coming weeks, months, and even years. So everybody else, thank you so much and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, and evening. Goodbye to you all.